Hey guys, I want to welcome you back to another episode of Pistons Talk Podcast presented by FanDuel. Hope you guys are having a great Saturday. Happy 4th of July weekend to everyone that is celebrating today. We do have a jam-packed episode for you guys today. We'll be going over 4 segments, and the segments will be we have an Isaac Bonga update, what is happening with him. We'll be going over DeMar DeRozan. He is set to be getting a buyout from the Sacramento Kings. We'll be going over, does it make sense for the Detroit Pistons to maybe see if DeMar DeRozan wants to play with the Detroit Pistons? We'll be going over the trade exception. Pistons have 3 days to use a trade exception they generated last offseason when they did a sign and trade with the Sacramento Kings for Dennis Schroeder. And the last segment of the podcast is Jalen Duren. Kind of an update what's going on with him and his camp in restricted free agency. But let's start with Isaac Bonga. Now, Isaac Bonga was initially going to get a contract buyout from his club over in Europe. And this was all the way back in April. And we do have a tweet we are going to put on the screen for you guys. This comes from NBA Base. They are just kind of citing another publication, but it does say the Detroit Pistons are reportedly set to sign forward Isaac Bonga for a $875,000 release clause following the Las Vegas Summer League. So after the Summer League was over, the reports had stated back in April, end of April, I should say, the Pistons were going to buy him out of his deal over with the club that he was playing in the EuroLeague. And again, I think a lot of times when you look at possible players coming back overseas to play in the NBA, this type of thing is actually pretty common, believe it or not, where there is a change, there's an update, and we got an update right when free agency started that Isaac Bonga has not accepted an NBA offer, contrary to the previous report from Serbia, and said Bonga will wait for NBA free agency to open on July 1 before weighing offers from NBA against lucrative proposals from Eurobasket clubs. And this comes from Dantas. Now, Dantas works over at Basket News, and they cover a lot of European basketball, a lot of movement, and they cover it over there. So they're pretty in the know. They're pretty tapped in over with the situation that was happening with Isaac Bonga. Now, today we learned that he did ink a deal with a club over in Eurobasket. And it says Isaac Bonga is finalizing a multi-year agreement to go play for a club over in Europe. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce that because I know I'll butcher it. And you guys will probably clown me trying to pronounce this. I'm just not even going to try. But looks like he is going to be staying over in Europe. He is getting a deal that he doesn't want. Now, initially, I don't really know what the Detroit Pistons were going to offer him. They were going to pay $875,000 just to buy him out of his clause in his deal. But he's going to be staying over in Europe. And I want to come up here and actually admit I was wrong, which I do. Believe it or not, I hold myself accountable. I had a podcast, I want to say it was last week, and I kind of went over, hey, this is what I think his role could be with the Detroit Pistons. I even said that I don't know if Javonte Green is going to be back. He resigned yesterday. I thought Isaac Bonga was actually going to replace Javonte Green's role, and maybe that's why the Pistons did elect to re-sign Javonte Green. I'm just making an assumption and an educated guess. I don't have any inside information. I'm not going to pretend like I do. I will never do that on this podcast or this YouTube channel. But, Isaac Bonga was a 6'8" forward, 6'9" on some other sites, but one of the better defenders over in the European leagues and got better as a three-point shooter. So, again, looks like the deals kind of fell apart. He was looking to see if NBA teams were going to give him the offer that he wanted. Obviously, he didn't get much interest from NBA teams because if he did, he probably would have signed with them. Instead, he's going to be staying over in Eurobasket and playing in the EuroLeague. And there's, no shame in that. Obviously, deals fall apart. And it's perfectly normal. Like you got to get the bag. You got to secure the money while you can. He's only a 26-year-old player. Like he may play another year or two over in EuroLeague, and maybe when he's like 28, he wants to, come back over and play in the NBA, even though he did get drafted a few seasons ago, but did want to kind of update you guys on the Isaac Bonga. He is no longer coming over to the Detroit Pistons or the NBA for that matter. I think that's a big reason why Javonte Green was re-signed and brought back. But again, I do want to own up on my mistake when we did talk about on the podcast a couple of days ago about what his role could be and him possibly taking over for Javonte Green. That's what happens when you do a daily podcast every day. Like, you're just looking for topics, and I knew that there was some interest from the Detroit Pistons back in April, and obviously the deal fell apart. That's completely understandable. Completely understandable. Now, DeMar DeRozan is set to get a buyout from the Sacramento Kings, and we've talked about the Kings more with their interest in Jalen Duren and restricted free agency, and we'll talk about JD in a couple of segments of what's kind of going on there with his contract negotiations with the Detroit Pistons. But DeMar DeRozan is looking to get a buyout, and I've seen some fans kind of float the idea there. There is a connection with Dwayne Casey, who is in the Detroit Pistons front office as a senior advisor. So he does work under Trajan Langdon and Dennis Lindsey as an advisor in that front office, does a lot of international scouting and NBA scouting, for, the draft process and stuff like that. But there is a connection in the front office with Dwayne Casey. I don't know if there's any other connections in the front office with DeMar, but this does come from Jake Fisher, said the Kings and DeMar DeRozan are expected to reach a buyout agreement soon. I've kind of gone back and forth with it, right? Because I know DeMar is 36. He's getting up there in age, but he's still a pretty good scorer. Now, I'm not saying like you try to lure DeMar to Detroit to be the starting two guard. I'm just saying, like, if he played the Karis LeVert role as kind of like a six man off the bench, I'd be like open to that. I'd 100% be open to that. I think when you talk about a half court scorer like he still can get buckets at a pretty decent level, even at 36 years old. He's gotten better as a passer. I think that couple of seasons that he did spend in San Antonio, he really did develop as a passer. Now, I think the one knock on him is he's not the perimeter shooter that I think a lot of Pistons fans would want. I think he shot like sub 30s this past season with the Kings, but he's still playing games. He obviously wants to play meaningful basketball. Right now in Sacramento, they don't really play too much meaningful basketball. It's a lot of just, going through another rebuild, retooling. You got Darius Acuff, you got, Maxine Renault, you got young guys, you got Keegan Murray. They still have Zach LaVine, Domantas Sabonis. Like, you can tell they're trending towards a rebuild because they're really focusing on the young talent that they do have there. So DeMar getting bought out. If I did have to guess, though, probably would want to stay in California because he is from there. Now, could the Lakers be a team to go after DeMar? I don't know. Maybe. I just realized how white the Lakers are. I've seen a lot of people talking about, even Stephen A. saying, like, what the hell's going on in LA? Because I feel like they have the whitest team in the NBA right now, which is like objectively hilarious. That's like a whole nother just like funny topic for another day. But maybe he wants to stay in LA. Maybe the Clippers make sense. This Golden State makes sense. But I did kind of want to just discuss the DeMar conversation because I do see some Pistons fans kind of bring him up. Again, like if he's just kind of playing your Karis LeVert role, I'm for it. But like starting at 36 next to Cade, I don't really know how I would feel about a Cade Cunningham, DeMar DeRozan backcourt. Again, like DeMar DeRozan, I think is still a really good player, but like him and Bradley Beal to me are just like kind of in that same tier right now of former All-Stars getting up there in age, but can still provide a playoff team like the Pistons some pretty good depth in scoring when you do need it. He definitely could be one of those scorers in a half court setting that can, set stuff up initially, get to the free throw line still at a pretty good rate at even as he's gotten older. You could put him out there in fourth quarters with Cade in crunch time, but something I'm just floating out an idea of a DeMar DeRozan, possibly on the buyout market. Could the Pistons look at him? You guys can let me know what you guys kind of think of DeMar DeRozan being 36, the connection with Dwayne Casey, and would you like him, off the bench for the Detroit Pistons as just kind of like a veteran on this team to help them with their half court sets, help them with this kind of the scoring punch, because obviously we thought Karis LeVert was going to be that, but so far he hasn't really been that. This past season he wasn't anyways. Probably one of his worst statistical careers of just kind of scoring the basketball in terms of just like points per game, obviously. But something I did want to kind of touch on with DeMar. Again, if I had to guess, I think he stays out in California. Now, segment 3, we're going to be getting into the Detroit Pistons and their TPE, their trade exception. So for you guys that don't remember, last offseason, the Detroit Pistons made a sign and trade deal with the Sacramento Kings, sending Dennis Schroeder to them, and they generated a trade exception. Pretty big trade exception at the time. And there's still some money left over on the trade exception. I believe 8.7 million to be exact. They did use some of the trade exception in the Kevin Herter and Dario Saric trade, where they did absorb, I think, like 5 million of Dario Saric's salary. Then they eventually waived him, but they still have 8.7 million left to take on additional salary if they do make trades over the next couple of days in free agency. But they only have 3 days to use it because these trade exceptions only last a year when you do make these initial trades. Now, again, $8.7 million might not sound like a lot, but you can get at least a rotation piece if you do want to use this trade exception. If the Pistons decide to use it, there's a case where they might not just use it because they're kind of at the salary cap floor right now. I believe they're like 1.6 million over the salary cap floor, and they have to worry about contract negotiations with Jalen Duren, who we'll be talking about next. But this could be a situation where the Pistons could just let this TPE expire and not use it at all. Definitely could be the case. Or they could use it in possible trades. I told you guys I still think that there's room for a small to medium or maybe even a big move for the Detroit Pistons, depending on what salaries are going out in terms of matching for a bigger deal. But these trade exceptions are very, very valuable. I do know that they did generate a trade exception when they traded for Isaiah Stewart, but I'm not sure um, if Isaiah Joe actually was used with the trade exception or cap space. If he was, then you would only have 4 million of trade exception with the Isaiah Stewart trade. But we're kind of focusing on the Dennis Schroeder one right now. Again, it does expire in 3 days. But just kind of keep an eye out for this, because it could be a situation where the Pistons do decide to use this before it does expire, or they could just decide, hey, like, it expired. We still have a Isaiah Stewart trade exception that we have another year to possibly use in potential trades, or just let it expire. More often than not, teams do like to use these, but sometimes they'll just let them expire because of how their cap sheet is, or how just in general they have what they need with their roster in the offseason. But did kind of want to discuss it with you guys. We talked about it yesterday. We're talking about it again today as we get closer to the 7th. Um, I think the organization is in the know with this trade exception and when it does expire, but did kind of want to just discuss it with you guys for a couple of minutes. We're going to get into our final segment, and that's Jalen Duren. So, as you guys know, there was a lot of updates over, I want to say, like the last 7 to 10 days with Jalen Duren. We had heard that he was underwhelmed by the Pistons' initial offer, and there were reports coming out of his camp that he was seeking a $40 million a year contract, which would put him, the Pistons gave him 5 years, $200 million. And since then, the Pistons have kind of just been very firm on the number that they want to give him. Again, we don't know what that number is. It hasn't been released publicly. I think the only people that know the number are Trajan Langdon and the guys in the front office that handle the cap space. But he's met with the Lakers. That obviously didn't go well because they decided to sign and trade for Walker Kessler, and they gave him a 4-year, $130 million deal, which is, 32.4 million on an average annual salary, not the 40 million that Duren was seeking. Um, he met with the Sacramento Kings down in Miami. I know Mark J. Spears had reported that him and Scott Perry had dinner in Miami. And I think there is still a lot of interest on Sacramento's front. Maybe that's why they're trying to clear cap, buying out DeMar DeRozan of his deal, and they can just kind of stretch and waive him and generate a little bit more cap space there. But Sacramento, to me, I don't even think it makes realistic sense for the Pistons to even do a deal with him, with Scott Perry. I mean, just because when you look at their books, like the only players that like they could possibly do a sign and trade with are like Zach LaVine in a final year of a $48 million deal, and Domantas Sabonis, who's on 2 years, approximately $90 million. And Pistons said, they're not really interested in a sign and trade. They're not interested in a Domantas Sabonis for Jalen Duren trade. I know the Lakers got a crap load of picks for Walker Kessler. I think the only way maybe the Pistons could come back to that conversation is if Sacramento actually offered similar compensation in terms of draft capital. But I don't really know if the Pistons would want draft capital from the Sacramento Kings, because I think where they're at is they're trying to build a competitive team. They're not really trying to draft a bunch of 20-year-olds, but the Kings picks will probably hold a little bit more weight than Utah's picks, because I think Utah intends to be good. Sacramento probably intends just to rebuild for the next 2 to 3 years, so those picks could be lottery. But with the way the new lottery system is, it kind of gets a little bit tricky and difficult. So that's something to kind of monitor as well. But the latest update on Jalen Duren is there is still just a wide gap between what his representation wants and what the Detroit Pistons are comfortable with offering. They did make an offer to him. They thought it was a fair deal. They thought it was within range of what they believe Jalen Duren is worth. Now, we can account what he did in the regular season. We can account the All-Star selection. We can account the third-team All-NBA. But what you also have to account in was the 14 playoff games. And I think that actually dramatically dipped his market in the Pistons front office eyes. I know a lot of people have saying, just pay the kid, just pay the man, who cares? I think where the Pistons are at, they have a figure. And if I had to guess, I think it's between 30 and 35 million. I think I'll get a similar contract to what Walker Kessler got. And I've seen some Pistons fans saying, like, no way Jalen Duren gets a similar number to Walker Kessler. He's better than Walker Kessler. Doesn't really matter who's better. It's what the market is right now. I mean, you can just take Walker Kessler out of it. I mean, Isaiah Hartenstein just signed a contract extension to stay in OKC for $25 million a year. I mean, you look at a guy like Avasa Zubac in Indiana. I mean, he's around $20 million. Not too many teams right now are paying centers the money that Jalen Duren and his representation want. Not a lot of centers are making Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, even Bam Adebayo, for that matter, money. They're just not. Unless you're a center that is, dropping a good, 25 and 10 a night, it's just not going to happen. I know Jalen Duren did drop like 19 in around 10 a game, but I think the Pistons understand that overpaying him can kind of close a window with how they want to compete in the East. I think that's why you've seen a lot of their contracts structured this free agency. Only 1-year guaranteed deals, 2-year guaranteed deals, short-term salary on Kevin Huerter, only a 1-year fully guaranteed deal for John Collins, 1-year re-signing with Javonte Green. They brought back Danish Jenkins on a team option, which is a biannual exception. So he's going to need a new contract after this upcoming season is over. You got a non-guaranteed deal with Tolu Smith as your third center. Like, this team is still kind of projecting their cap space out going into next offseason with when Asar Thompson is extension eligible. Like, Asar Thompson could get an extension this offseason, but again, it really depends on like what Asar's camp wants. I think Asar Thompson's camp is probably like around the similar range of like, $30 million annually a year. It could be more depending if he does take a bigger jump this upcoming season with production. But kind of circling back to Duren and the update, I honestly think that Pistons are just kind of staying firm with their offer. They're not going to budge. There is one team realistically that can actually go after Jalen Duren, and it's the Brooklyn Nets, and they can't even offer him a max. There is no team right now in free agency that can offer Jalen Duren the restricted free agency 4 years, $177 million. Brooklyn is the only team that does have cap space, but they couldn't even offer him a max. So the ball is in Jalen Duren and his agent and his representation's court right now. They have to decide what type of deal they're going to take from the Detroit Pistons. Ultimately, I do think the Pistons are going to come out on top of not being able to get the price they want to keep Jalen Duren in the Detroit Pistons uniform. I don't think you have to worry about a $200 million, $210 million contract because they really don't have any leverage. They don't. There's no other teams in free agency. Boston, they got their son, Mitchell Robinson. They re-signed Kata yesterday. Lakers got their center. Kings, to me, is just a pipe dream. It really is. And the Pistons have basically said, you're restricted, man. We're not giving you a sign-and trade. So you either take the deal we give you, or, we'll just wait this out. We'll wait this out to the last possible minute. But did want to give you guys an update there with Jalen Duren. We should know a little bit more about, what he's going to sign for in the coming days or weeks. Hopefully it's not weeks. Hopefully this does get done before the Pistons play their first summer league game. I'd like to assume that it does. But before we do wrap up this podcast, we have to hear from our sponsors over at the FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, you guys, there is Central Division odds, and the Pistons are the odds-on favorite to win the Central at a minus 175. Right below them is the Cleveland Cavaliers at a plus 230, Indiana Pacers at a plus 480, Milwaukee Bucks are at a plus 20,000, and the Chicago Bulls are at a plus 25,000. But really cool to see that the Detroit Pistons are on top of the Central Division and on the odds very early. A lot of these NBA futures right now, I would get on if I were you guys, especially with MVP, Central Division, because the odds during the summer are so high that, as the season goes on, if it's plus 3,000 right now, it might be like plus 200 like the last month of the season. So I think we just want to throw $5 on it, you guys. Just let it sit and you win. You're probably like, cool, good investment. But want to wrap this podcast up. Hope you guys are having a great rest of your 4th of July holiday weekend. Don't know if we're going to be doing a podcast on the 5th. Really depends on what is going to happen with more NBA news as it does kind of cycle throughout the podcast. We try to get at least 3 to 5 topics for you guys on these daily podcasts, but easiest way to support this YouTube channel is if you're watching live on YouTube, hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button does help us out a lot. It does push more Detroit Pistons content to Pistons fans just like yourself. If you're an audio listener, easiest way to support the podcast is rating us and giving us a 5-star review wherever you do get your podcast. We're available on all audio platforms, whether you're a Spotify listener, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, whatever it may be. We're on every audio platform imaginable. But again, appreciate you guys. Hope you guys are staying safe. Take care, and we'll catch you guys in the next podcast episode. Peace.